quite some many years ago. Actually, it was the time of my first pastorate, my first role as a pastor in a parish. I was hearing confessions one Saturday night. So I realized that's a long time ago. We haven't had confessions. Usually it's Mass on Saturday evening. And there was this one gentleman that came in. Those were the old days when we had the sliding doors. You weren't a priest, you didn't know how those priests worked, getting their muscles worked out. And this one gentleman came in, and just about everything he said was about how he had been offended by other people. It was one thing after another, went on at quite some time, talking about how angry he was because of these people have hurt him in some way or other. So when he finished, I was looking for something for which to give him forgiveness, because he really hadn't mentioned anything he had done of which he might be guilty. And so I started suggesting, maybe we could do this or do that. About the second thing I suggested, he said to me, "You're taking kind of long, aren't you, priest?" And I thought of a couple things I could say to him, but I thought, well, better not. No use getting into a contest here. So I said, yeah, you're right. And I decided that God would give him absolution. I was wondering later if he would have had a similar complaint if he was receiving a massage. And then again, I think perhaps there are any number of people who, at least in their thoughts, have had the same kind of complaint or a similar complaint when they were having to listen to my homily. When it comes to practicing and really learning of our faith, it seems that among us that there's a kind of a tendency, a bent to favor that we would receive this in small doses or abbreviated lessons. And yet, God is the most important person in our lives. I can imagine people somewhere in their thoughts arguing that. But think about it. God creates you. God provides everything. The most important person in your life is God. And there should be that about us. How much time do you spend on your job? How much time do you spend fixing meals? How much time do you spend in recreation or watching television? How much time do you spend? How much time do you put forth? How much energy in getting to know God? I don't mean merely knowing about God. We can know all kinds of things about God, but do you know God? Do you really know God? See, if ever we get to the point where we look at God in our lives and we look at the reality of all the things that are a part of our lives, all gift, and you realize God, not in any just kind of a term, but in a remote reality that has very little to do with my life. God has absolutely everything to do with each of our lives. And if we get to that understanding, then I think we come to the possibility, at least to the threshold of rejoicing and having a sense of thoroughness about the possibilities of our lives. Actually, happiness, fulfillment, real fulfillment. When we read the scriptures or we listen to the scriptures, we are encountering God. Do you listen? Are you aware that whether or not you listen? I remember at one parish I was in where when we finished with the gospel, everybody was standing, of course. When we finished with this gospel, this guy usually sat on the aisle, and I'd see him. He had kind of like a trench coat on. And he'd sit down, and he'd get that trench coat up. And then he'd cuddle down. He's not going to listen to me. He's going to go to sleep. Is that what we do in our mind, in our heads, or even in our hearts? Is that, I hope he gets done quickly because we have other things to do. If we look at the opportunity, wow, we are encountering God. And most especially in the gospel, it is Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who is revealing to us God the Father. He talks about the Father in so many terms, in so many instances in the Scriptures, in the Gospels. Do we listen? Do we listen? Do we gain an understanding that this God is powerful, but just very loving? I was listening to confessions not too long ago, and somebody was talking about some malady that he was suffering, and he said, I know God is punishing me. God does not punish. God does not punish. Not too long ago, I was sitting in on a class, some time ago actually, and the teacher had asked me to sit in on this class, and I think it was second graders. They were very young, very small, and during the course of, I was sitting in the back of the room, and some little youngsters asked a question, and the teacher said, I guess that's kind of a question that Father should answer. So I got the point, that she didn't quite know what to answer this person. So I went to the front. Well, it was a little girl, and I knew which one it was, but I didn't hear the question. And her question was, think of this, a second grader perhaps? Does God love the devil? And you'd think, well, wow. Should that come from a second grader? And would you think the answer would have to be, of course not. But the answer, of course, is, sure, God loves the devil. That's who God is. See, for all the sins you've piled up in your life, well, not here, of course, I was thinking on the east side. God puts them aside, forgives you, loves you, loves you. Think about unconditional loving. Any of you here accomplish that? Unconditional loving, no ifs, ands, or buts. If I go on for another half an hour, will you still love me? And you would be, we're trying to gain this encounter with God as something that is not just on a Sunday morning, but throughout our lives, on the job. When I'm just talking with somebody, and it occurs to me that this wouldn't be possible without God. Ever get lost? Maybe not in the woods. I'm not use that. I've been lost in the woods any number of times. That here I am. How did I get out of there? But maybe you're traveling. You visit a city with which you're not familiar, and you aren't certain just exactly where it is that this place is that you want to reach. So you don't know the pathway. So what are you going to do? And most of us guys will drive around and drive around and drive around, and it'll take us about an hour or two, and then we'll stop and ask somebody directions. The women will say, let's ask somebody for directions. We need directions. You and I each need direction. In Paul's letter to the Romans, it's chapter 8, by the way, if you want to look at that again when you get home. He's talking about the Spirit, and almost a kind of an ultimatum. If you live in the flesh, and what does that mean? If you live in the flesh, you will die. And the whole passage that we heard was about the Spirit of God, and he finally says at the end, if you live in the Spirit, you will live. And Jesus in the gospel, I often use this, at least a portion of this gospel, when I'm in the hospital and have a chance to anoint somebody with the sacrament of the sick. And it says, come to me, all you who are weary and find life burdensome, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Learn from me. Because I'm going to teach you everything you need to know. I'm going to teach you about God. I'm going to teach you how to get to happiness, to the fullness of living. And he says, my yoke is easy and my burden light. What he's saying is, I will carry whatever burden you have with you. And I will teach you, and I will teach you, and I will teach you. Do you expect, for instance, when you come to Mass on a Sunday morning, you get up, you kind of plan your day, you get in the car, you drive over here to Mass, that your life is going to be changed? Does that ever occur to you? I would think, in a sense, it's kind of dangerous to come to Mass. So that doesn't mean you shouldn't come. But isn't it somewhat dangerous to think of the fact that if you're going to come into this room, you're going to come to this celebration, you're going to come to this prayer, and it's going to change your life, why would I want to do that? Because that's what we must do. We don't want to just know about God out there in the distance where he's safe, he, she, whatever, is safe, doesn't bother me too much. Or get to know that God is genuine, God is loving, God is ever present, and wants to redeem you to the fullness of sanctity, holiness. How many of you are holy? 2, 3, a little more, 15, 20, do I get 40? Do I get 100? Yeah, we don't know that. We can live that fullness of God. Why not? Don't leave God here in church.